Tonight, let us set aside the world of the present and step into a realm where the boundary between mortal and divine is thin, where the breath of gods mingles with the cries of men, and where heroes walk between heaven and earth. It is the story of Hercules, a name that echoes across centuries, carrying with it images of strength beyond measure, labors impossible to endure, and a life both glorious and tragic. Hercules is a figure known to all, yet his story is more than the striking of monsters or the lifting of weights. It is a tale of contradictions, of power and vulnerability, of triumph and grief, of divinity and mortality entwined. His life is not simply myth. It is a meditation on what it means to be human in the shadow of gods. Before we begin, take a moment to rest. Adjust your place of comfort, let your breath deepen, and let the quiet of the evening surround you. Perhaps there is a faint sound nearby, the turning of a page, the whisper of night air, the soft hum of silence itself. Allow those sounds to settle you as we drift backward into the time of myth. And as always, if this journey into calm reflection brings you peace, you may consider returning for more, but only if it feels right to you. Now, let us begin. In the beginning, Hercules was not yet a hero. He was a child, born into a world already heavy with conflict, a life already marked by destiny and danger. His father was Zeus, king of the gods, whose thunder ruled the sky, whose lightning bent the will of men and gods alike. His mother was Alcmene, a mortal woman of Thebes, renowned for her beauty and virtue. From this union came Hercules. Part god, part man, his life suspended between the heavens and the earth. But even before his birth, trouble stirred. Hera, queen of the gods, wife of Zeus, burned with jealousy. Time and again Zeus strayed. Time and again Hera's wrath fell not upon him, but upon the children born of his wandering. None would suffer more than Hercules. From his first breath, Hera's malice sought him. She delayed his birth so that another child of Zeus, Eurystheus, might be born first, destined to rule. She vowed that Hercules would live a life of struggle, his strength twisted by trials. And yet, the infant carried a spark no goddess could extinguish. The serpents in the cradle one night, as Alcmene cradled her child, Hera sent 2 serpents to slither into the nursery. Their scales gleamed in torchlight. Their tongues flickered. Their bodies coiled toward the cradle where Hercules slept. But the child did not cry. He reached out with tiny hands, seized the serpents by their throats, and squeezed until they lay lifeless at his side. The house awoke to find the boy calm among the coils of the slain snakes, his strength already greater than men could fathom. It was the first sign of what he would become. The training of a demi-god as Hercules grew. His tutors sought to shape him. He learned music, though his temper was quick, and the lyre often shattered in his grip. He learned wrestling and archery, and in these he excelled beyond measure. He hunted with spear and bow, bringing down lions and boars, his strength already legendary among boys his age. He was taught wisdom by centaurs, courage by warriors, discipline by sages. And yet always, his strength set him apart. Other boys played. Hercules broke bows by accident. Other youths sparred. Hercules struck too hard, leaving companions gasping. His gift was also his burden. The shadow of Hera, and always Hera watched. Her hatred was patient, her malice enduring. She would not let him rise without suffering. This duality, divine power, divine enmity, framed his youth. He was not allowed the peace of an ordinary boy. Every triumph carried the shadow of trials yet to come. Hercules grew into manhood tall and broad-shouldered, his muscles like sculpted stone, his presence commanding. Villagers whispered his name, sometimes in awe, sometimes in fear. For though he was only part divine, it seemed the blood of Zeus spoke loudly through him. He could lift what others could not move, wrestle beasts others fled, strike with a force that shattered bones. But strength alone is no gift without trial. And for Hercules, trial came early. As a youth in Thebes, Hercules was already tested. Bandits ambushed travelers along the roads, terrorizing merchants and peasants alike. When Hercules came upon them, he did not hesitate. With his club, a simple branch torn from a tree, smoothed only by his grip, he struck them down. Where others needed armies, Hercules stood alone, his blows like thunder. He hunted as others could not. Once, when a great lion prowled the hills near his home, scattering shepherds and devouring flocks, Hercules tracked it into its cave. The villagers waited, fearful that he would never return. But soon he emerged, the lion's pelt slung over his shoulders, his club in hand, his face calm. It was the first time he wore the skin of a beast, a symbol that would later become his mark Hercules, the slayer of lions. And yet, even in triumph, shadows gathered. For Hera had not forgotten. Hera's hatred for Hercules was implacable. Time and again she had sought to destroy him, in his cradle with serpents, in his youth with dangers. Now, as he grew into manhood, she struck not at his body, but at his mind. One evening, when peace lay over Thebes, Hera descended with her curse. A madness fell upon Hercules, thick and red as a storm. His vision clouded, his reason drowned, his hands burned with fury he could not name. In that frenzy, he turned upon his own family, his wife Megara, and their children. Innocent, laughing unaware, became the victims of his blind rage. By the time the madness lifted, the house lay in ruin, his loved ones lifeless in his arms. Hercules awoke to horror. His strength, once pride and promise, had become instrument of tragedy. He fell to the ground, groaning, tearing at his hair, cursing his hands. He begged for death, for no man, he thought, deserved life after such a crime. Thebes mourned, and whispers filled the streets. Some pitied him, saying it was the gods' cruelty, not his own. Others feared him, avoiding his shadow. Hercules himself could find no peace. He wandered the fields alone, his head bowed, his eyes hollow. To be strong enough to wrestle lions meant nothing, when he could not protect those he loved. His hands, which had broken chains and slain beasts, were stained with the blood of his children. It is here that Hercules' story shifts. For what makes him remembered is not only his strength, but the way he bore his guilt, how he sought redemption not by hiding, but by labor. At last, in despair, Hercules sought guidance. He traveled to the oracle at Delphi, where the priestess of Apollo spoke in riddles and visions. There, amid smoke and chanting, he begged to know how he might cleanse himself, how he might atone for the crime Hera had forced upon him. The oracle's words came. He must place himself under the command of King Eurystheus of Tiryns, his cousin, the very man whose birth Hera had advanced, whose throne had been secured at Hercules' expense. For 12 years, he would serve Eurystheus, performing tasks set before him. If he endured, he would find purification. If not, his name would be cursed forever. It was a bitter decree. To submit to Eurystheus, a lesser man, a coward who ruled only by Hera's trick, was humiliation. Yet Hercules bowed his head. For redemption, he would bear the yoke. And so began the turning of his life. From grief and madness, Hercules would walk a road paved with trials. 12 labors that would test not only his strength, but his courage, his endurance, his will to rise above fate. Each labor would bring him face to face with monsters, with impossible tasks, with challenges no mortal could survive. Yet in them lay the chance not to erase his crime. For that could never be. But to balance it, to turn his strength from destruction to service. Hercules at this moment stands at the threshold, his past marked by triumph and tragedy, his future by labor and legend. Imagine him in Delphi, kneeling before the oracle, the smoke curling around him, her voice echoing from the temple walls. He listens, silent, his head bowed, his heart heavy. The path ahead is not one of ease but of burden. Yet for Hercules' burden is the shape of destiny. He rises from the temple, shoulders squared, and walks into the sunlight, a man broken, yet unyielding, ready to turn suffering into story. Thus the youth of Hercules ended, not in joy, not in triumph, but in grief and madness. And yet, from that grief emerged the path that would define him. For in seeking redemption, he would perform deeds so great that his name would echo across ages. The boy who strangled serpents, the youth who slew lions, the man who bore guilt heavier than stone, now became the hero destined for labors that would test the very limits of human endurance. The labors of Hercules were waiting. When Hercules placed himself under the rule of King Eurystheus, it was not with pride, but with resignation. Eurystheus was no hero, weak in body, timid in spirit, and yet, by Hera's design, Hercules now stood as his servant. The king rejoiced in this irony, taking cruel delight in setting tasks that seemed impossible, hoping each would end in the death of his stronger cousin. But what was meant as punishment became legend. For each task, though born of humiliation, became a story retold for centuries. The first command was simple in words: impossible in deed, slay the Nemean lion, a beast whose golden hide could not be pierced by blade or arrow. Hercules set out alone, his only weapons a bow, a quiver, and his heavy club. The villagers of Nemea told him of the lion's terror, how it prowled the hills, its roar shaking the ground, its claws rending men and cattle alike. Many hunters had entered its lair, none had returned. He tracked the beast across the rocky slopes, following paw prints as large as shields. At last he found it near its cave. He loosed arrows, but they glanced from its hide like pebbles on stone. The lion roared, a sound that echoed like thunder through the valleys, and charged. The ground shook beneath its weight. Hercules braced, his club swinging. The blow landed true, and yet the beast did not fall. Its eyes burned with fury. Hercules realized no weapon could kill it, so he seized the lion with his bare hands. Man and beast wrestled, rolling across the earth, claws tearing, muscles straining. Dust rose around them, the air filled with snarls and groans. At last, with a final heave, Hercules wrapped his arms around its throat and squeezed. Slowly, the roar faded, the body slackened, and the lion lay still. He skinned it with its own claws, the only tools sharp enough, and draped the pelt across his shoulders. From that day onward, the lion's skin became his armor, its head his helmet. When Hercules returned to Eurystheus wearing the pelt, the king trembled and hid within a bronze jar, daring not to look upon him. From then on, Eurystheus issued orders through a herald, too fearful to face Hercules directly. Next, Eurystheus commanded him to slay the hydra of Lerna, a serpent with many heads, one of them immortal. Each time one head was struck down, two more grew in its place. Hercules set out with his nephew Hylas. They came to the swamp where the hydra dwelled, the air thick with stench, the waters bubbling with decay. Out of the mire rose the monster, its heads hissing, its eyes glowing like embers in the dark. Hercules struck with his club, shattering one head. But two sprouted, writhing and snapping. He cut another, two more. The monster only grew stronger. Despair threatened, but then Hylas lit a torch, searing the stumps as Hercules struck. The flames cauterized the wounds, preventing new growth. Together they fought, strike, burn, until at last only the immortal head remained. Hercules severed it and buried it beneath a great stone, so it would never rise again. Then, dipping his arrows in the hydra's venom, he made them weapons of death more terrible than steel. But Eurystheus, jealous of his success, refused to count this labor, saying Hercules had received help. Eurystheus next demanded a task not of slaughter, but of capture. Bring back the Ceryneian hind, a deer sacred to Artemis. Swift as the wind, its antlers of gold, its hooves of bronze. To harm it would anger the goddess, to catch it alive seemed impossible. For a year, Hercules pursued it through forests and mountains, across rivers and valleys. The deer was tireless, each day escaping by a breath. Hercules tracked with patience, sleeping little, living as a hunter more than a king's servant. At last, he cornered it near a stream at dawn. With care, he loosed an arrow that wounded, but did not kill, pinning it by the hoof. Gently, he bound the creature and lifted it onto his shoulders. As he carried it, Artemis herself appeared, furious that her sacred hind had been touched. Hercules bowed, speaking with humility, telling her it was not by choice but by command. The goddess, seeing his reverence, allowed him to continue, but warned that no mortal strength could endure without divine favor. Thus Hercules returned the hind alive, his strength matched by patience and respect. Next, Eurystheus sent him to capture the Erymanthian boar, a beast of monstrous size that ravaged fields, uprooted crops, and struck terror into villages. Through snow-covered mountains Hercules tracked it, his breath steaming, his feet crunching in ice. The boar charged through forests, tusks, gouging trees, its squeals echoing like horns of war. At last, Hercules drove it into deep snow, where its legs floundered and slowed. With a roar, he leapt upon it, binding it with chains. The beast thrashed, but the snow held it fast. Carrying it back, Hercules displayed it before Eurystheus, who once again hid in his jar, trembling at the sight. Eurystheus sought humiliation, not just danger. He commanded Hercules to cleanse the Augean stables in a single day. Stables that held thousands of cattle. Uncleaned for years, their filth piled so high it Seemed no man could endure the stench, let alone clear it. But Hercules, clever as well as strong, saw another way. He diverted the courses of two great rivers, channeling their waters through the stables, washing them clean in a torrent. By evening, the task was done. Yet Eurystheus, enraged that Hercules had used cunning instead of brute force, declared the labour invalid. Still, the people whispered of his brilliance, that strength is not only in muscle, but in mind. At last, Eurystheus sent him against the Stymphalian birds, creatures with bronze beaks and metallic feathers sharp as blades, which they rained down upon villages. They nested in a swamp so thick that men could not approach. Athena herself gave Hercules aid, gifting him bronze clappers. He struck them, the sound echoing like thunder, startling the birds into the air. As they rose, Hercules loosed his arrows, each dipped in hydra's venom. The sky darkened with their fall, feathers and blood raining into the marsh. And so the labour was complete. By now, 6 labours had passed. Each had seemed impossible, each had bent before Hercules. And yet the purpose was not only conquest, but transformation. The man who once killed in madness now struggled not only against monsters, but against himself. Each labour demanded patience, cunning, humility as much as brute force. Each taught him that strength without wisdom was empty, that victory required more than a club. Imagine him resting one night, the lion's skin draped around his shoulders, the club by his side. The fire crackles, the stars shine cold above. He gazes into the flames, silent, remembering Megara and the children he lost. Every beast slain, every river bent is not triumph, it is penance. His labours are not for glory, but for redemption. The first 6 labours had tested Hercules' strength, patience, and cunning, yet Eurystheus, urged by Hera, devised still more impossible commands, each more distant, more dangerous, more extraordinary than the last. For if Hercules could endure these, he would endure anything. Word reached Eurystheus of a bull in Crete, massive, white as snow, its breath like fire. Some said it was the bull Poseidon had sent to King Minos, a gift turned to curse when Minos refused to sacrifice it. Now it roamed wild, trampling fields, scattering men with its rage. Hercules sailed across the sea, landing upon the rocky shores of Crete. He found the bull grazing upon a hillside, its horns gleaming in the sun. When it saw him, it lowered its head and charged, the earth trembling with its weight. Hercules leapt aside, seized its horns, and wrestled it to the ground. The bull bucked and thrashed, its hooves tearing the soil, its breath scorching his face. But Hercules held firm, his arms like iron bands, his legs rooted like pillars. Slowly, the beast yielded, exhausted beneath him. Binding it, he carried it across the sea to Eurystheus. The king, as always, hid from sight, peering from behind his jar as Hercules presented the living monster. The bull was released, and in later tales it would wander into new myths. But for Hercules the labour was complete. Next came a darker task. In Thrace, the warlike King Diomedes kept 4 horses unlike any others. They were no ordinary steeds, but flesh-eaters, fed on the bodies of strangers and enemies. Their breath stank of blood, their eyes rolled with madness, their chains clinked with restless hunger. Hercules gathered companions and sailed north. By night they reached the stables, the ground soaked with the remnants of slaughter. As Hercules loosed the chains, the mares reared and shrieked, their teeth snapping like wolves. Diomedes himself came with his men, armed and fierce. A battle raged in the torchlight, swords clashing, cries echoing. Hercules fought like a storm, his club-felling warriors one by one. At last he seized Diomedes, dragging him to the stables, and cast him to his own mares. They tore their master apart, their frenzy sated at last. Only then could Hercules tame them, binding their jaws and leading them back. Eurystheus, horrified at the sight of the blood-stained beasts, ordered them freed. Some say they wandered to Olympus, where they were devoured by wild lions, others that they vanished into the wilds. Eurystheus next sought a prize for his daughter, the belt of Hippolyta, queen of the Amazons. The Amazons were warrior women, living apart from men, fierce with bow and spear, their queen the mightiest among them. The belt, given by Ares, god of war, symbolized her authority. Hercules sailed with companions to their land. When he arrived, Hippolyta herself greeted him with courtesy. Hearing his request, she agreed to give the belt freely, moved by his strength and honesty. But Hera would not allow such peace. Disguised as an Amazon, she spread rumor that Hercules had come to steal their queen away. The Amazons, believing betrayal, rushed with weapons drawn. Battle erupted on the shore. Arrows flying, swords flashing. Hercules fought, forced by chaos, and in the struggle Hippolyta was slain. Grieving yet resolute, he took the belt and sailed home. Thus what might have been kindness became tragedy, another labour twisted by Hera's malice. Now Eurystheus demanded something farther, still the cattle of Geryon, a monster who dwelled at the very edge of the world, upon the island of Erythea, beyond the ocean. Geryon was no ordinary being. He had 3 bodies joined at the waist, 3 heads, 6 arms, 6 legs, a warrior vast and terrible. To reach him, Hercules journeyed west across deserts so hot they seemed endless. When the sun itself burned too fiercely, Hercules drew his bow and threatened to shoot the god Helios. Amused, Helios gave him a golden cup, vast enough to sail across the sea like a boat. In that cup, Hercules reached the island. There he faced Geryon and his 2-headed hound, Orthrus. With arrows dipped in hydra's venom, he struck them down, their cries echoing across the waves. At last, Geryon himself fell, pierced by Hercules' arrow. Driving the cattle before him, Hercules herded them across the lands, through rivers and mountains, back to Eurystheus. The king, overwhelmed by the sight of beasts from the edge of the world, offered them in sacrifice to Hera. The next command was cloaked in mystery, to bring back the golden apples of the Hesperides, treasures of Hera's own garden. These apples, glowing with divine light, were guarded by nymphs and by Ladon, a serpent coiled about the tree, its 100 heads never sleeping. First, Hercules had to learn where the garden lay, for no mortal knew its place. He wandered across the earth, seeking counsel. Along the way he freed the Titan Prometheus, bound to a rock, his liver devoured each day by an eagle. Hercules slew the eagle with an arrow, and Prometheus, grateful, revealed how to find the garden. At last, Hercules came to Atlas, the Titan who bore the heavens upon his shoulders. Atlas, father of the Hesperides, agreed to fetch the apples if Hercules would bear the weight of the sky. So Hercules bent beneath the heavens, the vault of stars pressing upon his shoulders. The weight was crushing the sky infinite. Sweat ran down his brow, his legs shook, but still he stood. Atlas returned with the apples, smiling. He offered to deliver them himself, unwilling to resume his burden. But Hercules, cunning, asked him to hold the sky just for a moment, while he adjusted his cloak. Atlas agreed, and Hercules, freed, seized the apples and departed. Thus, by strength and wit alike, the 11th labour was won. The final labour was the most fearsome, to descend into Hades itself, the underworld of the dead, and bring back Cerberus, the 3-headed hound that guarded its gates. Guided by Hermes and Athena, Hercules descended into darkness, past rivers of shadow, past souls who murmured in endless procession. The air was chill, the ground damp, the silence broken only by weeping. At the gates he found Cerberus, vast and terrible, 3 heads snarling, serpents writhing from his mane, his tail a coiled dragon. The beast lunged, jaws snapping, eyes burning with underworld fire. But Hercules, unarmed, seized him with bare hands. Man and monster struggled, their roars shaking the caverns, shadows scattering like leaves in wind. Slowly, Hercules forced him down, binding him with chains of bronze. Dragging the hound upward, he brought him into the light of the living world. Eurystheus, when he saw the beast, fell back in terror and begged him to return it. And so Hercules led Cerberus back to Hades, freeing him at the gate. The 12 labours were complete. What began as punishment had become legend. Hercules had slain beasts, crossed oceans, descended into death itself. Yet the labours were more than trials. They were mirrors of his soul. The lion taught him to wrestle without weapons. The hydra, that strength alone multiplies chaos without wisdom. The hind, patience. The stables, cunning. The mares and belt, the tragedies of human fear and misunderstanding. The cattle, endurance. The apples, cleverness against trickery. And Cerberus, the courage to face death itself. Imagine Hercules now, resting after his labours, the lion's skin about his shoulders, the bow across his knees. Around him, silence. He gazes not with triumph, but with weariness. His hands, though mighty, tremble slightly. His eyes, though fierce, carry sorrow. For even as he conquered, he knew the truth labours could cleanse, but not undo. Megara and his children would never return. Redemption is not erasure, it is endurance. Thus ended the 12 labours of Hercules. What Eurystheus had meant as ruin became glory. What Hera had meant as torment became story. And yet Hercules' life was not finished. For beyond the labours lay new trials, battles, loves, humiliations, and at last his end upon the pyre. But the labours endure. To this day, when we speak of impossible tasks, we call them Herculean. They are not just stories of strength, but of endurance, of will, of bearing what no one else can. The 12 labours had been completed. Hercules had faced lions, serpents, mares, monsters, rivers, and even the gates of death. He had carried the sky upon his shoulders, brought back the hound of Hades, and stood before Eurystheus with victory again and again. And yet, his life was not finished. For Hercules was never allowed rest. Strength such as his, forged in both glory and guilt, was never left idle. Beyond the labours, more trials awaited, not decreed by Eurystheus this time, but by fate, by desire, by the choices of gods and men. Even before the labours had ended, Hercules joined the Argonauts, the band of heroes led by Jason in the quest for the Golden Fleece. It was a fellowship of the greatest men of the age: Orpheus the musician, Castor and Pollux the twins, Atalanta the huntress, and many more. On that voyage, Hercules was a towering presence, both shield and hammer to his companions. His strength pulled oars that no other could budge. His courage steadied men when storms threatened to tear the Argo apart. Yet fate removed him early. On the shores of Mysia, his beloved companion Hylas went to fetch water and never returned, drawn beneath the surface by water nymphs, who desired his beauty. Hercules searched desperately, calling his name through the hills, tearing through forests, raging at the riverbanks. When the ship sailed without him, he remained behind, grief-stricken, unwilling to leave Hylas behind. So the Argonauts continued without him. Hercules' place in that fellowship was brief, but it revealed a truth. Even the strongest man could not fight every loss. Not all of Hercules' trials were glorious. Some were strange, even humiliating. After the labours, he fell into new misdeeds, killings born of rage, quarrels that ended in blood. Once more guilt pressed upon him, and once more the gods demanded penance. This time, his punishment was servitude to Queen Omphale of Lydia. Unlike Eurystheus, Omphale was not a coward. She was clever, commanding, and amused by the sight of the strongest man alive forced into obedience. Hercules was made to dress in women's robes, to spin wool, to serve at her side as though he were a maid. Omphale, by contrast, sometimes donned his lion's skin and carried his club, reversing their roles in jest. To some, this was humiliation beyond bearing. To others, it was another kind of trial, one not of strength, but of humility. Hercules endured it, perhaps with bitterness, perhaps with quiet amusement. The myths differ. But the image remains the greatest of heroes seated at a loom, weaving thread, his club set aside. It was a reminder that even strength must sometimes bow, that even heroes are not masters of their fate. For all his might, Hercules was also a man of passion. His life was threaded with loves, some tragic, some fleeting, some enduring. He won the hand of Io, princess of Ocalia, in a contest of archery. His arrow flew truest, his strength unmatched. But her father, fearing Hercules' reputation, refused to grant her. Rage consumed Hercules, and in time, this slight would lead to greater tragedy. He loved also Hylas, the youth lost to the nymphs, whose name he called until his voice broke. Their bond was sung by poets as deep as any. His grief at Hylas' loss was not the grief of a comrade only, but of love itself. He married again after Megara, taking Deianira as wife. Their union was tender at first, yet, as with so much in Hercules' life, it carried seeds of sorrow that would bloom in time. Hercules' life was restless. He could not remain still, nor could the world leave him in peace. Again and again he was called to war, to quests, to battles. He fought against the giants who threatened Olympus, standing shoulder to shoulder with the gods themselves. His arrows tipped with hydra's venom, felling even the children of earth. He freed Prometheus from his chains, ending the torment the Titan had borne for ages. He ventured to Troy long before the Trojan War, slaying King Laomedon for deceit, his arrows striking truer than any army. He marched with companions, conquered kingdoms, toppled tyrants. His life was not a single story. but a tapestry woven with battles and journeys, each thread bright with struggle. And yet, through it all, a restlessness remained. Hercules did not build cities like Theseus, did not rule kingdoms like Perseus. He wandered instead, his strength always called to new trials, his soul never at home. If the labours showed his greatness, his wanderings revealed his flaws. He was quick to anger. Insults stung him more than spears. He struck too hard, too fast, leaving ruin where he had meant only to correct. He was loyal, yet reckless, his companions sometimes paying the price of his fury. He sought love, yet brought grief to those he held dear. For every triumph, there was shadow. For every act of courage, an act of rage. He was no perfect hero, no faultless god. He was mortal in his temper, divine in his power, and torn between the two. It is worth pausing here, at this stage of Hercules' life. Imagine him not in triumph, but in weariness. The lion's skin is draped across his shoulders, but it feels heavier than before. His club rests at his side, yet his hand does not reach for it. Around him, a campfire flickers, its smoke drifting upward into the night. He looks into the flames, and in them sees both monsters slain and loved ones lost. He sees Megara, Hylas, Hippolyta, shadows of faces that linger. For all his labours, for all his victories, peace eludes him. This is Hercules beyond the labours, not just a slayer of beasts, not just a servant of kings, but a man burdened by both greatness and flaw, wandering through a life that seemed never to grant him rest. Thus Hercules' story moved beyond the tasks that made him famous into a life restless, fractured, unfinished. He had fought beside heroes, served as a maid, loved and lost, conquered and grieved, and yet his greatest trial still lay ahead, not in a labour decreed by a king, nor in a monster lurking in a swamp, but in the slow turn of fate. For in love, and in betrayal, Hercules would meet the end that even strength could not escape. The labours were long behind him. The battles, the wanderings, the humiliations and triumphs, all had shaped his life into legend. Yet Hercules was still a man. And as with all men, fate waited. In the end, his greatest trial did not come from a lion, or a hydra, or even the hound of the underworld. It came from love, from jealousy, from a mistake that no strength could undo. Hercules' last great love was Deianira, daughter of King Oeneus. She was known for her beauty, but also for her quiet strength, her grace, her loyalty. Hercules courted her with gifts and deeds, and in time she became his wife. But even their marriage began with struggle. For to win Deianira's hand, Hercules fought the river god Achilles, who courted her as well. Achilles could take many forms, and he came at Hercules as a bull, horns gleaming. They wrestled man against god, the river's current roaring in rage. At last, Hercules broke one of his horns, casting the god down, and so claimed Deianira as his bride. Together they lived for a time in peace, but peace never lasted in Hercules' life. One day, while travelling with Deianira, they came to a river swollen with flood. A centaur named Nessus offered to carry Deianira across while Hercules swam. Hercules agreed. But halfway across, Nessus turned traitor, attempting to steal Deianira away. She cried out, and Hercules, hearing her, loosed an arrow dipped in Hydra's venom. The shaft struck true, and Nessus fell, mortally wounded. Yet with his dying breath, the centaur spoke with cunning. He told Deianira that his blood, mixed with seed, was a charm of love, that if ever Hercules strayed, she need only anoint his garments with it, and his heart would be hers again. Deianira, innocent and trusting, took a vial of the blood. She did not know it carried Hydra's poison. Years passed. Hercules remained restless, his heart drawn toward Isle, the princess he once had won but never claimed. He brought her into his household, and whispers spread of his love for her. Deianira, fearing she had lost her husband's affection, remembered the words of Nessus. She took a fine tunic and soaked it in the centaur's blood. Believing it a charm that would restore his love, she sent it to Hercules as a gift. When he put it on, at first nothing happened. But as the sun warmed the cloth, the poison awoke. It seeped into his skin, burning like fire, eating into flesh, fusing cloth to body. Hercules cried out in agony. He tore at the tunic, but it clung to him, each fibre soaked with venom. His skin ripped as he pulled, his blood mingled with poison. The pain was beyond endurance, yet he endured, staggering, roaring, his voice carrying across mountains. Deianira, when she learned the truth, was stricken with grief. She had meant only to win back his love, and instead had destroyed him. Overcome with despair, she ended her own life. Hercules, writhing in torment, knew his end was near. His strength could shatter mountains, but it could not undo poison. His hands, which had held the sky, could not lift this weight. He journeyed to Mount Oeta, where he built a great funeral pyre. Upon it he laid his lion's skin, his bow, his club, the symbols of his life. He climbed atop it, the flames waiting, the air thick with silence. But no one dared light the fire, for who would burn the greatest hero of Greece? At last, a friend named Philoctetes stepped forward. With trembling hand, he set the torch to wood. The flames rose, crackling, devouring. Smoke curled into the sky, carrying with it the last breath of Hercules the man. Yet Hercules was no ordinary man. As the fire consumed his mortal body, Zeus looked down from Olympus. He saw his son, who had borne labours, guilt, and pain beyond measure. He saw a man who had endured suffering with courage, who had risen again and again from grief into struggle, who had carried both strength and flaw with equal weight. And Zeus decreed that death would not claim him fully. From the pyre, the mortal part of Hercules was burned away, but his divine essence rose. A storm split the sky, thunder rolled, and from the flames a figure ascended. Hercules was welcomed into Olympus, his place among the gods secured at last. He was reconciled even with Hera, who gave him her daughter Heba's bride. The hero of sorrow became the immortal of joy. Imagine the scene upon Mount Oeta. The pyre blazing, villagers watching from the hillsides, their faces lit by firelight. They see Hercules, not writhing now, but calm, lying upon the lion's skin as though upon a bed. His eyes close. The flames leap higher, and then, as smoke curls upward, they glimpse what few have seen, the ascension of a man into godhood. The strongest of mortals, undone by poison. The most burdened of men, freed by flame. Hercules' life ended not in quiet old age, but in agony and fire, and yet also in triumph. Thus ended the mortal life of Hercules. A life of strength and sorrow, of labours and love, of triumphs unmatched and flaws unhidden. He bore the weight of guilt, the toil of redemption, the scorn of gods, and the pain of loss. And in the end, he bore fire itself, and rose beyond it. The story of Hercules does not rest in the ashes of Mount Oeta. It rests in Olympus, where he joined the immortals, his name forever among the stars. But even more, it rests in memory, in the hearts of men who see in him not only might, but endurance. Not only power, but the will to carry pain. For Hercules was never just a slayer of beasts. He was the bearer of burden, and that, more than strength, made him divine. Centuries have passed since Hercules walked the mountains of Greece, wrestled lions in caves, or descended into the underworld. The fires of his pyre on Mount Oeta have long gone cold, and yet his presence lingers, close as breath. Even now, when we speak of impossible tasks, we call them Herculean. His name is not only story, not only myth. It is language itself, woven into the way we measure effort and burden. Why does Hercules endure? Why does the figure of one man, half divine, half mortal, born into jealousy and destined for grief, remain alive in memory while countless kings and warriors fade into dust? Perhaps it is because Hercules embodied contradiction. He was the strongest of men, yet undone by a woman's gift of poisoned cloth. He was the bravest of heroes, yet prone to madness and rage. He was a slayer of monsters, yet guilty of killing his own family. He was exalted among gods, yet humiliated by wearing a woman's dress in Omphale's court. He was worshipped in temples, yet feared in his lifetime by those who whispered of his temper. He was not perfection. He was humanity amplified, flawed, burdened, restless, and yet always enduring. It is this paradox that makes him timeless, not that he was without weakness, but that he bore weakness and still rose. The labours themselves, told again and again in song and story, became more than feats of strength. They became symbols. The Nemean lion, the struggle against what cannot be pierced by ordinary weapons, the need to grapple with life bare-handed. The hydra, the problem that multiplies as you fight it, teaching that wisdom must join with strength. The Ceryneian hind, the pursuit of what is sacred and swift, showing that patience can equal power. The Augean stables, the labour not of destruction, but of cleansing, where cunning cleans what muscle cannot. The Stymphalian birds, dangers that descend from the skies, scattered by courage and invention. The Cretan bull, mares of Diomedes, Geryon's cattle. The wildness of the world, to be faced and tamed. The apples of the Hesperides, the temptation of what lies beyond reach, the need for both cunning and resolve. The capture of Cerberus, the final labour, the confrontation with death itself, faced not with weapon but with will. Each labour is a metaphor, a mirror of the burdens we bear. They remind us that life itself is labour, and to endure it requires not only strength, but resilience, wit, and patience. But beyond the symbols lies the heart of his story suffering. Unlike gods, who lived in eternal ease, Hercules suffered. Unlike ordinary men, his suffering was magnified. He bore guilt heavier than mountains, punishment harsher than justice, pain more burning than fire. And yet, he carried it. He did not surrender. He bore madness, loss, humiliation, and still rose each time. His greatness was not that he was spared suffering, but that he bore it without ceasing. Imagine him once more, in the quiet of night, the fire flickering before him. His lion's skin is wrapped around his shoulders, though it no longer warms him. His club rests nearby, though he does not reach for it. He sits, silent, staring into flames, the memories of beasts and battles stirring in his mind. In that silence lies the truth of Hercules, for he is not only the roar of combat, but the quiet endurance of sorrow. What can we, centuries later, learn from Hercules? Perhaps that strength is not the absence of struggle, but the will to continue through it. That guilt cannot be undone, but it can be borne with labour and endurance. That triumph is not always victory, but persistence. That even the strongest hands cannot protect from every grief, yet still they can build, defend, cleanse, and carry. Hercules reminds us that being human is to be flawed, to be burdened, to be caught between desire and duty, rage and love, and yet, also, to be capable of greatness in endurance. Hercules was worshipped as a god, but he was loved as a man. The Greeks built temples to him, yes, but they also told stories of his temper, his failures, his mistakes. They did not hide his flaws, they preserved them. For in those flaws, people saw themselves. They saw the parent who failed yet sought redemption. They saw the worker facing tasks that felt impossible. They saw the soul burdened by guilt but unwilling to surrender. In Hercules, mortals saw not an untouchable god, but a reflection, a promise that even in weakness, there can be strength. And so his story endured. Rome adopted him, calling him Hercules still, building temples in his name. Poets sang of him, dramatists staged his suffering, philosophers invoked his labours as allegory. In time, he became a model for endurance itself. Even today, his name lingers in our language. When we speak of burdens, of labours too great for ordinary men, we call them Herculean. His image stands in marble and painting, in story and song. He is never forgotten. For Hercules is not only myth, he is memory. He is not only ancient, he is eternal. Imagine him once more, standing not in Greece, not upon Olympus, but in the mind's eye. His shoulders broad, the lion's skin draped across them, his club resting in one hand. Yet his eyes are not fierce now. They are wary, thoughtful. He looks not at monsters, but at us. And in that gaze lies the invitation to bear our burdens, to endure our struggles, to labour through guilt and grief without surrender. To know that strength is not perfection, but persistence. This is the legacy of Hercules. Not that he slew beasts, not that he ascended Olympus, but that he endured, flawed, burdened, broken, and yet unyielding. Thus the story of Hercules ends, not in the ashes of a pyre, not even in the halls of Olympus, but here, in the telling, in the remembering. He is both mortal and divine, both flawed and enduring. He is paradox and symbol, pain and triumph. And as you drift toward sleep tonight, carry with you his truth that life itself is labour, that strength lies not in conquest but in endurance, that to bear one's burden is itself heroic. Hercules knew this, and now, perhaps, so do we?